The whole village laughed as Samuel pushed his old wooden plow across a field everyone believed was dead. The ground was dry, cracked, and hard as stone. Men stood by the road, shaking their heads. Some called him foolish, others said he had lost his mind. Even children pointed and laughed as he planted seed after seed into the dusty earth. But Samuel never argued. He only smiled, wiped the sweat from his face, and kept working. He believed something the others could not see. Before the year was over, those same people would stand in that very field with tears in their eyes, wondering how the impossible had happened. But what did Samuel know that everyone else had missed? Samuel had been a farmer since he was a boy. His late father had taught him that the land always rewarded patience, honest work, and hope. Every morning before sunrise, he walked to his small farm with simple tools and a quiet prayer. His wife believed in him, even when there was little food left at home. His young daughter dreamed of the day their farm would be full of green crops again. While other farmers left the dry land and searched for work in the city, Samuel refused to give up. He believed the village could live again if someone had the courage to stay. But the long months without rain made every day harder. Neighbors began selling their farms. Friends begged Samuel to stop chasing a dream that would never come true. Then, one morning, he found something buried beneath the dry soil that changed everything. Samuel knelt on the dry ground and brushed away the loose dirt with his hands. Hidden beneath the cracked soil was a small stream of water. It was only a thin trickle, but it was enough to give him hope. He hurried home and told his family. His wife smiled with tears in her eyes, but she warned him not to tell the whole village until he knew the water would last. The next morning, Samuel carried buckets and simple tools back to his farm. He worked from sunrise until sunset, digging a narrow channel to guide the water through his field. His hands became sore and his back ached, but he refused to stop. After several days, tiny green shoots began to push through the soil. Samuel thanked God, believing his hard work was finally paying off. Then disaster struck. One night, a group of boys sneaked into his field after hearing people joke about his magic farm. Laughing, they trampled the young plants and filled the small water channel with rocks and dirt. By morning, most of the fresh crops had been crushed. The little stream was blocked, and the ground was dry again. Samuel stood in silence as he looked across the ruined field. His heart felt heavy. Weeks of hard work had disappeared in a single night. Soon the villagers gathered around him. Instead of showing kindness, many laughed even louder. "We told you it would never work," one man said. "You should have left with the others," another added. Even some of Samuel's old friends turned away without saying a word. Their silence hurt more than the laughter. That evening, Samuel sat alone beside the broken field. He wondered if everyone had been right. Maybe his dream had been too big. Maybe he had failed his family. His wife quietly sat beside him and placed his daughter's small hand in his. The little girl looked up at him and whispered, "Dad, the seeds believed you." "I still do." Those simple words reached deeper than all the cruel voices in the village. Samuel stood, wiped the dust from his clothes, and looked across the damaged land one more time. If the crops could be planted once, they could be planted again. If the water had found its way through the earth once, it could find its way again. No matter how many people laughed, he made a promise that night. He would not leave. He would not quit. He would make the dry land live again. The next morning, Samuel returned to his field before the sun rose. The broken water channel was still there, and the crushed plants lay scattered across the dry ground. For a moment, he closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Then he picked up his shovel and started again. This time, he knew he had to work smarter, not just harder. Instead of digging one narrow channel, Samuel built several smaller ones. If one became blocked, the water could still reach the crops through another path. He gathered smooth stones from the nearby river and lined the channels to keep the water flowing. It took many long days, but little by little, the field began to change. An old farmer from a nearby village stopped to watch him one afternoon. He had heard about the man everyone laughed at. Instead of joining the jokes, he quietly shared a few simple ideas he had learned over many years. He showed Samuel how to save rainwater in large barrels and cover the soil with dry grass to keep it cool and hold moisture longer. Samuel thanked him and put every lesson into practice. The work was slow. Some days the sun was so hot that it felt like all his effort had been wasted. A few plants still withered before they could grow. Strong winds knocked over the young crops more than once. Each problem brought another challenge, but Samuel refused to let one bad day decide his future. His wife and daughter worked beside him whenever they could. Together they carried water, pulled weeds, and repaired the small channels after every storm. They were tired, but they never stopped encouraging one another. Weeks passed, and the field slowly came back to life. Fresh green rows stretched across the land where only dust had been before. The plants were still small, but they stood strong under the morning sun. Birds began returning to the field. Bees buzzed from flower to flower. For the first time in many months, the farm looked full of hope instead of failure. People passing by could not help slowing down to look. Some still laughed, but not as loudly as before. Others stopped talking altogether. They could see something changing, even if they did not want to admit it. Samuel never looked up to see who was watching. He simply kept planting, watering, and believing. Deep inside, he knew that real success did not grow in a single day. It grew one faithful step at a time. The weeks turned into months, and Samuel's field became the brightest patch of land in the whole village. While many farms were still dry and empty, tall green crops swayed gently in the warm breeze. Strong stalks stood where cracked earth had once stretched as far as the eye could see. People passing by stopped to stare. They rubbed their eyes, wondering if they were seeing a dream. When harvest season arrived, Samuel walked into his field with his wife and daughter before sunrise. They smiled as they picked the first baskets of fresh corn and vegetables. The harvest was larger than Samuel had hoped for. By the end of the week, his small storehouse was filled with food. For the first time in many years, his family did not worry about their next meal. Word spread quickly beyond the village. Farmers from nearby towns came to see the field with their own eyes. They asked Samuel how he had kept his crops alive when everyone else had failed. He welcomed them with a kind smile and showed them the small water channels, the rain barrels, and the dry grass protecting the soil. He hid nothing. He believed that knowledge should be shared, not kept. The same people who had laughed at him now stood quietly at the edge of his farm. Some lowered their heads in shame. Others whispered that maybe Samuel had been right all along. Even children who once pointed and laughed now watched him with respect. Samuel noticed the change, but he did not boast. He simply thanked God for every good harvest and returned to his work. Success had not made him proud. It had made him more grateful. Soon, more fields around the village began to turn green. A few farmers copied Samuel's ideas, and they started seeing small results of their own. Hope slowly returned to a place that had almost given up, but not everyone was happy. A wealthy landowner, named Victor, had bought several farms for very little money during the long drought. He had planned to own most of the village. After people lost hope and moved away. Now, as the land came back to life, families were no longer willing to sell. Every green field meant his plan was falling apart. Standing on a nearby hill, Victor looked down at Samuel's farm with a cold stare. He clenched his fists as the sound of laughter and celebration drifted across the fields. Samuel believed his hardest days were behind him. He did not know that someone with power, money, and pride had just decided to become his greatest enemy. A few days later, Victor called a meeting in the village square. He claimed that Samuel had found a secret underground river that belonged to everyone. He accused Samuel of keeping it for himself, and said the village had been fooled. Many people gathered to listen. Some believed Victor because he was rich and powerful. Others stayed quiet, unsure of what to think. Samuel walked into the square with his wife and daughter beside him. He looked calm, even as angry voices filled the air. Victor pointed at Samuel and said, "If you truly care about this village, prove that your success came from hard work and not from luck." Samuel did not raise his voice. Instead, he invited everyone to follow him to his farm. When they arrived, he showed them every part of his work. He pointed to the small water channels he had dug with his own hands. He opened the rain barrels he had built from old wooden drums. He lifted the dry grass covering the soil and explained how it kept the water from drying too quickly. He even showed them the places where the crops had once been destroyed and how he had planted everything again. The old farmer from the nearby village stepped forward. He told everyone that Samuel had asked for nothing except advice, and had done every bit of the hard work himself. Several farmers who had copied Samuel's methods also spoke. They said their own fields had begun to grow because they followed the same simple lessons. The crowd became silent. There was no secret, there was no trick, only patience, courage, and months of honest work. One by one, the people who had laughed at Samuel lowered their heads. Some quietly said they were sorry. Others thanked him for giving them hope when they had already given up. Victor had nothing left to say. His lies had fallen apart in front of everyone. He turned and walked away without another word. The village leader stepped forward and thanked Samuel for saving not only his own farm, but also the future of the whole community. Everyone began clapping. The sound echoed across the fields where laughter had once filled the air. Samuel looked at the people who had mocked him. He could have reminded them of every cruel word they had spoken. Instead, he smiled gently. "If we keep looking at yesterday," he said, "we will miss the chance to grow tomorrow. Let us rebuild together." In that moment, the village learned that the strongest people are not those who seek revenge, but those who choose to lift others even after they have been knocked down. From that day forward, the village was never the same. The empty fields slowly turned green again, as more families followed Samuel's simple farming methods. Neighbors who had once lost hope now worked side by side, sharing seeds, tools, and water. Children ran through healthy crops instead of dusty ground, and every harvest brought food to tables that had once been empty. Samuel never forgot the hard days. He remembered every laugh, every cruel word, and every night he wondered if he should give up. But instead of letting those memories fill his heart with anger, he used them to help others who were struggling. He welcomed young farmers to his land and taught them everything he had learned. He never asked for money. He only asked them to help someone else when they had the chance. Before long, the kindness he shared spread from one village to another. People came from far away to learn from the farmer everyone had once laughed at. As for Victor, the people no longer trusted his empty promises. Many families chose to keep their land instead of selling it. Without anyone willing to follow his dishonest plans, he quietly left the village to start over somewhere else. His greed had cost him the respect he cared about most. One evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, Samuel stood at the edge of his field with his wife and daughter. The golden light shone across the waving crops, just as he had once imagined during the darkest days of the drought. His daughter smiled and asked, "Dad, did you ever think this day would come?" Samuel looked across the land and nodded. "I hoped for it," he said softly. "Hope gave me the strength to keep working, even when I could not see the answer." The villagers gathered that evening to celebrate the biggest harvest in many years. There was laughter again, but this time it was filled with joy instead of cruelty. As they shared food and thanked one another, everyone understood the lesson Samuel's life had taught them. People may laugh at your dream because they cannot see what you see. They may tell you to quit because they are afraid to keep trying themselves. But if you choose faith over fear, hard work over excuses, and kindness over revenge, one day your life will speak louder than every word spoken against you. Sometimes the impossible only waits for one person who refuses to give up. Tell us what you feel about the story on our comments section, and please don't forget to subscribe, share and turn on the notifications button for more stories. Thank you.